Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi on this Thursday as we take a look at Hurricane Irma, which 30 hours ago, or maybe a little bit longer than that, was a strong tropical wave. And in 30 hours, we have a Category 2 hurricane now with top winds of 100 miles an hour. And it's been strengthening rapidly, and it continues to show signs of strengthening rapidly as we move through the morning hours and into the afternoon. This is going to be a major hurricane in time, and there are a couple of impediments out there that we're going to point out. On its track, it's going to run over a patch of cooler water in a day or two, which might level the strengthening off a little bit. But once it gets through that, it is going to strengthen more, and this is going to get to a Category 4 hurricane, I think, if not maybe even higher over time. The track so far has been a little. This is a little bit of a clue. The track has been so far a little bit south of the model guidance up until this point. So that is something we need to pay attention to, because how far south and west does this get? Does it move over the islands? Does it move north of the islands? Does the track to the south with the strengthening high to the north perhaps even eventually push this into the Northeast Caribbean? Not impossible. I think at this point, because it's so far out, there are so many variables. I would again caution, do not focus on any particular model points in terms of where it takes it. That's not important. What's important is what is going on in the upper air over the next 5 days, particularly with regards to the strong upper high that's out in the Atlantic and how models handle that. And I'm going to get into that extensively. And we're going to open up a number of possibilities. There's also a strong upper low in the south central Atlantic that would create hostile shear conditions if it keeps dropping to the south. That appears now to have stopped. And the system is forecast to lift out to the northwest and get completely out of the way. It's not in the way at the moment, but it is something that we have to look at. So look, let's switch over to the weather side of it, and we're going to come back at the end and talk some more. So just stand by while I switch over. This is Irma on the visible satellite view loop this morning, and by the way, you can see that little bright white flash is actually the sunrise moving from east to west across the earth, and flashes up right there and then just continues on westward. Irma remains a well-defined system, a very tight inner core and a well-defined inner core. It's also continuing to move on a course slightly north of due west at a fairly steady clip of 12 or so miles an hour, and it's now just getting ready to approach 35 degrees west. It's still way out, some 1,600 miles east of the Leeward Islands, so it's a long, long way to go. But this has every possibility of becoming a major hurricane over the next 3 days. We've got very good inflow here. See the high clouds also showing us we have good outflow as well, but there's a lot of tropical moisture getting fed in. Here's that inner core we're talking about. The only part of it that looks perhaps a little bit weak in terms of the convection, and we're only talking relatively speaking, is a little bit here on the northwest side, but that could be just something temporary. I'm expecting strengthening to continue over the next several days. I'm going to widen out, though. There is one issue that I'm watching here, and that is with regards to this upper low in high levels of the atmosphere, and you can see it right, fairly well defined. Whoops, there we go. Fairly well defined, and it extends to the south, some stronger winds in the upper atmosphere, and if that upper low were to move southwestward, it would eventually create strong wind shear conditions that Irma would run into, and that would be problematic at the very least for further strengthening, and it might actually even cause it to weaken. However, most these upper lows at the high levels of the atmosphere tend to be rather volatile in their motion. Over a given day, you can see them move in 3 or 4 different directions. They don't move in the same way that the systems in the lower part of the atmosphere, where they just kind of take a course and go. These are these are subject to only all kinds of different factors. The systems in the higher layers of the atmosphere tend to be rather large in scope, so they kind of meander around. Weather models with this upper low are forecasting this to lift out to the northwest. So if that is the case, then Irma is not going to have any issues with strong upper level winds, because they will pull up northward. Okay, but while we're still, at least through the morning hours, the motion seems to be was initially southwest. It looks like maybe the center of this upper low is starting to move more toward the west. So again, all the models suggest that this is going to be lifting out to the northwest, and that really winds up being, I think, the only thing that I want to keep an eye on in terms of trying to figure out how strong Irma may get. There was also, you can see this dry air, by the way, that's up to the north, right in here. This is all dry air, but it doesn't seem to be causing any problems with Irma now, and I'm thinking that as long as this upper low does pull up to the northwest, that should basically shrink out that dry air area, and that it won't have any impact. So those two factors, and maybe a small pocket of cooler than average sea surface temperatures out in this region here in the tropical Atlantic, that probably, those are the only impediments for this getting into a major hurricane. And with respect to the sea surface temperatures, it would probably slow the rate of strengthening down for a little bit until it got a bit further west up toward the northern Leeward Islands. Also, the other question with regards to the strength would be that weather models are forecasting this to turn more southwestward, where the water temperatures are a bit warmer. So that's another consideration. If that southwest motion does take place for a while, that would probably help to continue the steady strengthening trend that this thing has been on for the last 30 or so hours. Okay, so where are we going with all this with respect to what weather models are doing? So let's look at the Hurricane Irma model intensity forecasts, and we can thank tropicaltidbits.com for this and all the maps that you see, all the weather model maps that you're going to see, and I just want to give them a big round of thanks and all the credit in the world for the wonderful work that Levi Cowan does. And he, by the way, has a YouTube channel too. I shared his video yesterday on my Facebook, so if you haven't seen his video from last night, you should give it a good look. Most of the intensity models take this to a Category 3 hurricane, some of them as early as the next 48 hours by Saturday. Most of them have them as a Category 3, even a couple as a Category 4 by Sunday. A bunch of them kind of hold it as a Category 2 a little longer before they make it into a 3. And we have a couple of models that take it up to Category 1 and kind of leave it there. That could be for a number of reasons, depending on the track and maybe how those models are handling the upper low that's out in the Atlantic. But the cluster seems to be certainly a strong 2 to a 3, probably more so closer to the 3 than the 2 as we move into later in the weekend and in through the first part of next week. So everything here says major hurricane. And with respect to the hurricane model tracks, here's the motion that goes north of west to west, and then west southwest as it nears 50 and 55 degrees west. And then we have some of the models starting to turn it a little more to the north. Looking at these track models, I would suggest that most of them are probably going to wind up taking these either over the northernmost Leeward Islands or to the north of the islands, at least, if we extrapolate out. But we'll wait and see. As time passes, of course, we'll get to see a bit more of more of the areas to the west of 60 West, so we can see what the models are doing with impact with track down the road. Now, I looked at all the overnight models, and if you saw my videos, the last few videos with regards to Irma and the setup, we are pretty much still in the same place. We are waiting to see how strong this ridge in the Atlantic is going to get. And I'm going to start here with the GFS. And this is the model view of this morning. So you have this big upper high, you have this upper high, and sandwiched in between is a little bit of weakness with a little upper low. And right now, with that course slightly north of west, Irma seems to be responding just a little bit to that weakness that's in between the two ridges. Across the northeast, we've got these deep troughs, and of course we're getting that shot of rather cool air that's coming in tonight and lasting into the start of the holiday weekend. Here's Harvey, by the way, now well inland, and we'll talk about Harvey in just a little bit. Now, let's move forward on the GFS, and you can see the motion is west-northwest, but starting tomorrow, that upper high begins to strengthen quite a bit, and the weakness disappears for the most part. And notice that Irma, which is right here, starts moving more west-southwestward. And that's consistent, by the way, with what the European does as well. Here we are now. This is 2 a.m. Monday morning, still going, and now it's starting to turn more toward the west and a course back slightly north of due west. I'm going to stop it here for the moment with the map, because I want to switch to the European at this point. So this is Monday night. Now, so let's look at what's happened with the upper air at this point with the upper high. So you have this ridge that extends out in the Atlantic, almost due north of Irma, and that ridge extends southwestward back over toward Florida. We have the jet stream in the northeast running down to about southern Virginia, and there's going to be a series of upper air troughs that are going to be swinging around this system up here, this upper air storm that's sitting in Hudson Bay. And when we compare this with the European, and here it is, here's the European's view. Now, they kind of look the same, but the differences between the two, there's some subtle differences in the two models that are important. First, let's back up the European a bit, and we'll start with this evening, and this is Irma, the reflection of Irma on the European. You can see that the ridge, there's this narrow east-west upper high, a little bit of a weakness here, just a slight one. That is probably, again, the reason why we're seeing that pull north of west, and that weakness disappears. Now here's Irma, the European's reflection of Irma right there. We are now into Saturday evening, and notice it turns west and then west-southwest, maybe a little more southwest than the GFS. And in fact, between 96 hours, which is Sunday evening to Monday evening, the European is still moving it southwest. And the reason why is that it's subtle, but the upper high is just a little bit stronger on the European, not by much, but just enough. Also, the little weakness that the GFS shows, and let me switch over real fast. Here's the weakness on the GFS that Irma is responding to later in the period. The high is weaker on the western flank on the GFS, whereas when we look at the European, it's a little bit stronger, and the weakness there is just a bit weaker. It's enough. It may not be very much, but it is enough apparently to cause Irma on the European to travel travel southwest for a longer period of time. Also, the upper trough in the on the European and the jet stream across the eastern part of the United States is a little bit stronger than the GFS. The westerlies go down a bit further south, so that could be the reason why the ridge in the Atlantic is pumped up a little bit more. If you have a deep trough, you're going to have a strong ridge to compensate for that. So again, this is a subtle difference, but it's an important difference in terms of where it winds up in the long term, because when we take the European out, it really strengthens this ridge considerably as we move into the later Tuesday and Tuesday night of next week. It really builds that high up. So it forces Irma to take a track further south. Therefore, the model basically moves it over the northern leewards, over Puerto Rico, over the Dominican Republic, and over Cuba. It essentially rakes the entire island chain of the Greater Antilles and from the northern leewards on up to Cuba. And this is, by the way, on the 10th day, where it has the hurricane sitting somewhere over western Cuba. A land track is going to affect intensity, obviously, and because the Europeans' run last night took it right over all the islands, it really didn't have it strengthened much more than a Category 2 hurricane, which would make sense. Now, you can see the effect of the ridge here in the east. It's built all the way back at this point on the European, back almost west of the Appalachians. So you really, at least from the standpoint of what this model is telling you, you can't rule this out. I think all solutions right now, from going into the northeastern Caribbean to going north of the islands, are on the table. Now, here's the GFS's difference, of course, from the same start point. Because the upper ridge is weaker, the western flank in particular, it begins to respond. Irma responds to the weakness here that's going to be all east of the Bahamas and this deep trough that drops down into the Ohio Valley and down into the Tennessee Valley. So it's going to be responding to that. The upper high on the GFS is strong, but it's further to the east. Again, that western flank being weaker. So it moves it east of the Bahamas and south of Bermuda, and it looks like it's making a beeline toward the coast, particularly because with what it does with the upper trough, what it does with this upper trough here. Let me just back this up. Let me just shut this. Let me just turn the drawing off for a second so we can go back just a second. So here's that upper trough in the east. The GFS fractures the bottom half of that trough and just leaves it behind. You can see it there, right in here. Okay, we don't know if that's real or not. There's a lot of big variables here and a lot of big questions. And I would really strongly emphasize: do not focus on long-range model positions with regards to what you see. There is too much variability here. As we go past day 4, day 5, day 6, the scope of where things could wind up becomes much wider. And again, going back to what I said earlier, the two models are not that different when we looked at it back at day 5. Okay, you look at this on the GFS. We looked at this on the European. They're not that different, but the subtle differences in terms of the strength are going to make a huge difference in terms of the track and where this winds up. Look at the European's ridge later next week. If this is right, look how strong that ridge is in the Western Atlantic. Look at the GFS, not nearly as strong, and the axis of that ridge is further east, which allows for that opening to develop off the southeast coast. I can't make a ventured guess. I couldn't even make an educated guess at all at this point as to which of these models has the better handle on all of this. It is that upper high that is going to be key to where this ultimately is going to wind up, I believe. And then once we get that part of the equation settled, when we know for sure how far south this is going to get, then we can start looking at what is the upper pattern going to be along the East Coast with regards to where this is going to wind up. Is it going to wind up in the East Coast? Is it going to wind up moving much further south over or just north of the islands, and perhaps even winding up eventually into the Gulf of Mexico? Does it move so far south that it winds up in the Northeast Caribbean? Not impossible. It's not, I don't know if that's the more likely solution. I don't think it is. It's probably one that if I had to rule one of them out, that might be the first one I would rule out. But at this point, I think we just have to kind of leave everything on the table until we see what the ultimate model trends are. So we'll know over the next several days. I want to see what happens once it starts moving west-southwestward. How long does it stay on that west-southwest course? Okay, so let's now take a look. Let's take a look at what's left of Harvey, because we do have the remnant low now of Harvey moving northeastward out of Louisiana and into Mississippi and southeastern Arkansas, and eventually making its way into the Tennessee Valley. This is going to bring some rain over parts of the Northeast. And here's the wider view. And here's our nor'easter from 2 days ago, southeast of Nova Scotia. Looks like it'll pass south of Newfoundland. And here's the moisture from Harvey, which is going to head to the Northeast. Now, one thing to point out, that usually when these things go up west of the Appalachians, unless we have something in the northern jet stream to come down and energize it, they usually leave most of their rains there. So I'm not expecting a big rain here for late Saturday night into early Sunday morning. Maybe some spots will get a half an inch to an inch out of it, maybe some places a little bit more, but I'm kind of thinking that would be the top side limit. By the way, right up here is that cold front that's moving through the Northeast late this afternoon, that's going to bring down a shot of cool air, very cool air, starting later tonight and lasting into Saturday. As far as the rest of the Labor Day weekend is concerned, I think we're going to be okay with improving weather conditions during the day Sunday across the Northeast into the northern Mid-Atlantic, and Monday, Labor Day, looks like a nice late summer day. Okay, stand by, folks. We'll switch over and we'll have a conversation, and just hang on right there for just a couple of seconds while I switch to me. For just a couple of seconds while I switch to me. And I've switched to me. And I'm doing it clean. This after a good night's sleep, it makes a big difference. Nameless, will it become a Cat 5? Well, I mean, certainly I think we'll get to Category 4. The Hurricane Center did indicate that in their discussion today, taking it to a Category 4. I think they believe they took it to 16 north and 55 west. Which is only about a little over 300 miles east of the northern Leeward Islands as a Cat 4. So will it get to a 5? Well, that's going to depend on the ultimate track and how close it may or may not be to some of those islands, particularly some of the more mountainous islands. Certainly the upper air conditions would be supportive of it maintaining strength as it approaches that area. If it goes north of the islands and starts to head toward the, just east of the Bahamas, we've seen a number of storms achieve Category 4 and even Category 5 status. So it's not impossible that could happen. And yes, gifted shots. The GFS did have a Category 5 there by Monday. Let me just, again, let me emphasize here, do not focus on the specific model points after, say, day 5. Because with the subtleties in the differences in the models early, those differences become bigger over time, and therefore you're going to get all this variability. I think the takeaway so far from the models overnight, the GFS to the European, is that the GFS did go left, which is telling me, and certainly from what I was observing, that the ridge is stronger in the Atlantic. The western flank of that ridge is going to be is the most important thing, and this west-southwest motion that it goes on is also going to be very important. Ben Fothery wants, if it goes south of the islands and then eventually into the Gulf, is there enough moisture still there? Yeah, I mean, look, that's a that's a general statement to make. It's got to get there first. So I don't even know what we're going to be dealing with if in terms of how it would get there. A number of different things could happen in terms of strength. So, we can speculate all day long about that, but it doesn't have any real forecast value at this point because we still don't know, what it's going to do because it's so far out. It's going to be, we're going to be watching this for the next week plus. So don't get too worked up on anything in terms of the specific tracks in the long range. Okay, there are number of possibilities on the table. And by the way, I haven't really talked very much about the trough in the east. That's because I think the ridge in the Atlantic is so important that let's deal with that. We'll get that resolved once we have a good feeling for where how this is going to behave with respect to the ridge, and we get an idea of where this track is going to be. Then we could start looking at the trough in the east and what kind of impact that may have. Okay, so we're going to have to be let's be patient. I'm here to take you step by step along the way. Thomas Giovanello, I think the out-to-sea option will lessen over time. Certainly, if that ridge continues to build the way it's shown, Thomas, I think that that may very well be correct. I can't completely rule it out because we still don't know the answer to that question. Glenn Thompson, how long before the East Coast should start keeping an eye out? Mid next week. Yeah, we've got no issues here through the middle of next week. So if anything's going to happen, it's going to be late next week. We've got a whole long time to look at this. We're kind of sort of watching this now in sort of a marvel of meteorology to see something that in 30 hours went from a tropical wave to a Category 2 hurricane. I mean, that's just, that kind of rapid strengthening is rare. You see it in a handful of times, and this is one of those times. So we sort of, for you weather geeks out there, this is, something to kind of drop your jaw on for a little bit. Cynthia, you'll be over-prepared and hope to be underwhelmed no matter where you live. Yes, we do not want to get upset because we don't get the tragedy we were hoping. I tell that to people who get mad sometimes when you have, a forecast that doesn't quite go the way that is expected, and the outcome where you are is different, perhaps not as bad as what could have been, and I get people that get upset over that, and I'm like, my response to it has always been, why are you're upset because you didn't get the potential the tragedy you were hoping for? I mean, that just makes no sense to me. Steve Addy, if the high was not in control of steering, would Irma run straight, or does it depend on the temperature gradient across the sea surface? If there were no ridge there, or if the ridge was weak, Irma would be moving northwestward already and would probably be responding to the stronger westerlies that are located on the north side of that ridge. So if you're saying that, if we take the ridge away, we got to replace it with something else, and or if the ridge were weaker, this Irma would be moving with a solid northward component of motion, which it has not really done. All the track so far has been south of what the model guidance is, and I said this earlier. So it's important to recognize that, because that's a clue that the Atlantic ridge is stronger than perhaps what the model is, and it doesn't even have to be that much stronger. Even just a little bit stronger is going to make a difference here. Can we consider the upper level trend the last month or two to forecast Irma? Shay Gluck, can we consider the upper level trend the last month or two to forecast Irma? Well, let's consider the fact that since June, when we had the earlier one of the earliest tropical storms that formed in the tropical Atlantic with Brett, and also Tropical Storm Don in July, both were pretty far south. So there seems to be that particular characteristic seems to have carried over to the situation and the setup that we have right now with Irma. Yeah, I think that's a good observation. Let's see. I'm trying to get to everybody's questions here. All right, Connor. Now that's kind of, you've just laid down a very far-fetched idea of the track going so far south that it straddles along the north coast of South America and then crosses over. I'm guessing that's what you're getting at. No, I don't think that's a possibility here. Is it possible Irma can move to the northeast? What is your idea about the track? From here, Dio, no. I don't. There doesn't appear to be enough of a weakness to force this thing to turn, too early. So I don't see a northeast motion now. With respect to down the road, if it gets close to the east coast, at that point we're going to have to examine where the trough is. Raymond, was there another system in the Gulf of Mexico? You did say yes. I'm gonna let me just touch on that. Let me finish these points here, and then we'll jump on that. Austin Vanderhayden, I have a question about the tropical systems becoming extratropical in mid-latitudes. Why aren't these systems just called subtropical, since they lose their warm core and gain fronts? Well, I did see some conversations going on regarding the nor'easter yesterday that perhaps it was more subtropical in nature than anything else. I think it's just for a standpoint of sometimes, to try to kind of make things clean. If you start making things too technically complicated when you're giving the information out publicly, it tends to get confusing to some. So, perhaps the decision was made, since it wasn't going to impact any land, not to worry about whether this system had a subtropical nature or not. With regards to the nor'easter from the other day, I really don't think that would, if they had called it a subtropical storm, the outcome would have still been the same, which was basically a non-event for most people. And, the rain and some of the stronger winds that occurred were nothing exceptional. So it's not as if they, having it stand out as a subtropical system would have really made a difference. If it were going to be a storm that maybe had paralleled the coast all the way up and it was going to have some impact with gales everywhere and some other issues with regards to heavy rain, then maybe they would have made a decision. I don't even know if that whole conversation actually took place. I'm speculating. Junior Celeste at St. Lucia, we are watching it very closely with that southwest turn and increased forward speed. Yeah, if I were in the islands from 15 northward, I would be paying attention. Maybe even down to 14 north. So, I would kind of be paying attention to this at this point because that west-southwest track for you is concerning. Is there some, Cynthia Gwynn Yadis, is there some system in the Pacific that might affect the trough or the ridge in the east? You know what? There probably is. I haven't really given it a look that closely this morning, but when I get the time to look through the afternoon model runs, I'll take a look to see if there's something upstream, something that might, if there's a deep trough in the east, there's a strong ridge in the west. If there's a system coming into the Pacific Northwest, it might impact that ridge and flatten the trough out in the east. That's one possibility, and then another possibility is the reverse, where if there isn't a system coming into the Pacific Northwest, where the ridge in the west winds up being stronger, and then the trough in the east winds up being deeper. J-Bugs, didn't Harvey go from remnant low to a hurricane in 24 hours? You know what? Harvey did regenerate relatively quickly. It did have to fight the Yucatan Peninsula, I guess maybe because we were kind of on top of that because of its proximity to land. But I think this one probably was a little faster, but I got to go back and look at the advisories to see what the progression was from Harvey. Do the Atlantics have such a high this time of year? Warren Bremer. I'm assuming the strength of the upper high. Yeah, we're at the peak now of the strength. Usually, the strength of the ridge in the Atlantic peaks in strength in end of August, beginning of September, yeah, it is very strong. Yes, Ariel Perez, you're in the DR. Welcome. East European did straddle all of the islands from the northern Leewards, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Haiti, and on up across all of Cuba the long way. It did because of how far south it got. Do you think that this storm, Christopher, do you think this storm has a possibility of impacting New England? Okay, yeah, let's wait. Let's see. Let's figure out, where it's going to, be first. I think all possibilities are on the table from, everywhere in a very long-term speculative sense. I'm talking here, okay, folks, including the out to sea. So basically, if we have everything on the table, that really doesn't tell us very much about, we can't really zero in on any particular spot at this point. Marlene Flowers, based on current models, do I feel Irma could impact Florida and get into the Gulf? I know it's early, but please share your thoughts. I think, Marlene, the strength of that upper high is going to determine ultimately how far west it gets. And if that upper high is very strong and very stubborn, then you could possibly take a west-northwest track for a very long period of time. I would not rule it out. But I certainly would not get worked up over it at this point. Lee Bartlett, I suppose to be going to the U.S. I'm going to the U.S. Virgin Islands next Friday. Looks like I should start to change plans. Okay, next Friday. By then, whatever's going on it'll be long gone from there by then. But I don't know what's going to happen between now and then until we know for sure whether the hurricane is going to pass anywhere close to them. But I certainly would keep paying attention to the weather. Looks like they get smoked. Yes, well, that's on last night's run. If the European was right, they would take a path right overhead. But we don't know that that's the case. Pugmaster, Impact Texas. Look, again, out in the Atlantic right now, thousands of miles from the U.S. coast. So let's wait before we start, worrying. Okay, I would say your odds are against it, based on climatology, for something to come all the way across. It has happened, but Hurricane Allen comes to mind back in 1980. Which also achieved Category 5 status at one point. But to worry about that now, I wouldn't. I understand it's very sensitive there with everything that's going on. Which reminds me, okay, let me hang on one second. Let me see, because I didn't really talk about it too much. The southwest Gulf of Mexico. I don't think I have a shot that goes far enough south, but let me see if I do. Okay, great. So here we are in the southwest Gulf of Mexico, and you can see that there's moisture there, some blow-off moisture that's coming off from the Pacific. There is actually, here's Harvey, and this is kind of part of the feed of moisture that's coming up from the southwest Gulf and being drawn into the southeast around the circulation of Harvey. Now, once Harvey moves far enough north, that's going to get separated, and a lot of this is going to get left behind. Weather models continue to show pressures below normal in the southwest Gulf through the weekend and into next week. And some of the models did, again, try to generate some kind of tropical depression or tropical storm there. But anything that develops in the southwest Gulf under these conditions is going to be very, very slow to develop. So it's not like you're going to see what just happened with Irma happen over there. The conditions in the southwest Gulf right now are quite different from what they are in the eastern Atlantic. Do I have that tight shot of Irma? Here's a shot from the perspective of the African coast of Hurricane Irma. And if you look on the enhanced view right there, you can actually see the eye. It's very small, but it is evident and well developed actually as it moves to the west-northwest. So this is really wrapping up quite impressively as it moves west-northwestward. We may see the winds pick up based on satellite estimates a bit more in the advisories, the next advisory, which is going to be issued, at 5 p.m. Eastern time. Okay. LoJack, Central U.S. view would be better. I don't have one loaded up at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm going to try and put some other satellite loops into my broadcast software, so that this way I've been adding them as I go along, but I got to find the time to do it. But I'll try and get to that over the next day or so. All right, Cook Boss. Okay, well, you know what? Let's not speculate in those terms. I'm trying to keep this. If you see how I do things, with respect to my approach to weather and meteorology, I have a very even keel here. So, I try to look things in a really objective way and express my opinion, which is that's what it is. It's my opinion based on what I'm looking at. I'm kind of, sort of like going on a journey down and taking a slow walk on a path and observing everything that's around you and then trying to digest it all. And that's what that's my aim here. I try to do that. If I don't worry about something, if I'm not concerned about something, then it's fair to say that you shouldn't be that concerned. If I get worried about something, which is rare, then worry. Okay, by the way, I'm just looking now at the new GFS, which, brings this west-southwest and then starts to turn it northwest. So the GFS, again, is going to try and take this north and east of the Leeward Islands by a fair distance. And it has it as a strong Category 4 hurricane by day 5, which is consistent with the National Hurricane Center's forecast. And I just want to take a look. Let me just take a look quick at the upper air. I'm sorry, I can't punch it up on the screen for you to see. It is. I mean, the GFS compared to yesterday is a little, it is a bit south and west on the position today. By not a large amount, but it is, maybe about 60 to 100 miles further south than it was during the overnight run. So it seems to want to continue a slow trend toward the Europeans' view of what the European did last night. We are going to have the new European run in a couple of hours, so we'll be able to digest that all and see what that does. And it's not going to mean I'm going to be able to come to a greater conclusion later today, or even tomorrow, or the next day, or the next day beyond that. I am not going to tolerate, by the way, I've already done, that's 3. Really, this is not a weather modification page. This is not an X-Files meteorology page. So if that's your thing, please don't watch me. Okay, go someplace else. Go to a YouTube channel that talks about weather modification. This is not the place for it. And if I see you put up stuff about it, you're going to be blocked. And that's all there is to it. Because I know a lot of you here would be, a lot of you here are here for the weather, and that's what we're here for. Okay, I'm not doing nonsense. Anyway, sorry for the little rant there. Okay, Ben Fathery, how often do hurricanes form this close to Africa, and the ones that do form early, do they maintain strength and lose over time? Good question, Ben. It doesn't happen that often. There's actually only a very short window of time where the water temperatures are warm enough to do that, and that you still have a strong west to east push of the trade winds to move these systems along, and that's usually from late August to maybe the middle part of September, and then after that, those systems have a tougher time moving across. Many storms that have come off the African coast and have developed that far west have become notable storms over the many years. But there are also many that have come off and have recurved before even getting to 40 degrees west. So, it's kind of a mix in there, but, the African systems still can be quite formidable. Let's see. Well, Ben Fuller, keep your fingers crossed. At least for now, I would think that the Gulf is not on your list there. Timmy Turner, hi Joe, homesick. Usually wouldn't be on at this time. Sorry you're not feeling well, Timmy. Feel better. All right, very good. I'm not sure what the emoji here that you put up, Daniel Reina. I've already done, almost 25 minutes of weather, so I'm just trying to address everybody's questions. If this is putting you to sleep, maybe you should go somewhere else. Dale McCluskey, can you give an educated guess on where it might hit based on what you know at this point? Boy, I really don't feel confident about picking any particular point right now because of the fact that there's just too many variables. Let's wait a couple of days and revisit that. Okay. Kristen, chances that it hits San Juan, if it tracks far enough south, if it tracks far enough south, we are, European takes it right over Puerto Rico, but that's just one model. Okay. And we just got rid of another person, which is great. Darren Henry, chances of this hitting the Lesser Antilles. Watch how long it goes on a southwest track. If it gets on a west track, if it makes it down, in my view, if it makes it down to about 16 or even 15 north, the chances of the Lesser Antilles getting hit increases. Okay, so the further south, when it starts to make its west-southwest track, which we will see in about 2 days or less, the further south it gets in latitude, the greater the chance that the Lesser Antilles gets hit. If it hovers around 17 or 18 before it gets to say 50 west, then I think your chances are low. But if you when the system reaches 50 west, if it's down south of say 16 or 15, then I think your chances are very high. You know what? Again, silly stuff. Vanessa, really, come on. What are the chances of people getting eaten by alligators? I mean, why are you doing that? I think that warrants a timeout. Cynthia, yes, the ridge does look a little bit stronger on this particular run. Pugmaster, Katrina did have like an odd origin. I have to go back and review that. But I do remember that the origin was kind of odd in how the initial system came out. Renee, X-Files Meteorology, I'm referring to people who are posting comments here about weather modification and weather being controlled by the military-industrial complex, and that Hurricane Harvey was generated by the government or any of that other nonsense. I'm just not going to tolerate that here because this is a meteorology page, a meteorology channel and a weather forecasting channel. That's my my aim. So I really don't want to discuss or see comments along those lines. Okay. You know what? At this point, we're 51 minutes into this. and I had a great time. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I have to get ready for work. I got to hit the road. I'm a little bit behind schedule. Timmy Turner, who the crap would think the government could make a hurricane? I know. You know what? Yeah. Conspiracy theorists, to me, it's sort of like they have this. They act like they have this piece of information that only they have, and they tell it to you because, and then they say, I want you to listen to me. I have this power, and I want you to listen to me over it because I have this information that no one else has. I'm not, I don't have. That's a waste of time for me. Thank you, James, NASCAR fan. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, everybody. Darren, Dio, Delvin, who's been kind of quiet today. Cynthia, all my new people that have come on. Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. And we're going to try, and depending on how I feel, because last night I was kind of wiped out, I'll try and do another live stream around midnight. They seem to be, by the time I get everything ready, we seem to be going on sometime between midnight and 12:15. So we'll aim for 12 and probably closer to 12:15 than midnight. All right, keep up with all the latest on Irma and the remnants of Harvey and the Southwest Gulf and the Labor Day weekend and anything else on meteorologistjoecioffi.com, and Angry Ben, my partner in crime, Ben Scott, on nycweathernow.com for the New York City perspective. And by the way, on nycweathernow.com, he has his own ideas about Irma, and you might be interested in that, so take a look. And if you're new, subscribe to my YouTube channel so you get these live streams and you get notified, and you can join us in the conversation. And yes, Pugmaster, I will keep you all updated, I promise. Have a great rest of your Thursday, folks, and we will talk to you hopefully tonight at around midnight Eastern Time.